I'm Shambhavi. I'm a strategist at Gender at Work India. And this is Circle Back, our monthly conversation series where we unpack institutions and how they shape individuals and work cultures. Last time we spoke about disability and reasonable accommodation at the workplace with Shivangi Agrawal, who is a queer and disabled activist. You can find that discussion up on our YouTube and our Linktree. Today, we'll talk about non-discrimination. In that, what does a non-discrimination policy entail? What is the role of different stakeholders in enabling it, and more? We're so happy to be joined by Raj Mariwala. Raj is the director of Mariwala Health Initiative, an advocacy, capacity building, and grant making organization which focuses on accessible mental health for marginalized communities. Welcome, Raj. We also have Jyotsna Siddharth. Jyotsna is the country director of Gender at Work India and an actor, artist, and writer. Jyotsna's practice spreads across institutional building, intersectionality, arts, activism, and many more things. Thank you so much to the two of you for joining us today. I would also like to spotlight our Indian Sign Language interpreters, Nitika and Preeti, who will be interpreting the session for us as we go along. And as always, just before beginning, I would like to start with an acknowledgement of this space and of our own privileges as people who are interested and invested in these conversations. And at Gender at Work India, it is our intention to keep circling back. That's why this conversation series is named Circle Back, because these processes, these conversations are iterative and we want to keep coming back to them. So with that, I would like to hand over to you, Jyotsna. Please take it forward.
Thank you, Shambhavi. Hi, Raj. Welcome, and welcome everyone for this important conversation. Before we actually get into the conversation, Gender at Work India, as part of Circle Back, we do something called privilege acknowledgement, where we talk about our privileges and the fact that we're able to even have these conversations in the space that we are. So for me, I think I would like to I always see myself at the crossroads. I do come from a cultural privilege, but I also identify myself as a Dalit queer woman. So those intersections for me are really important because they give me a certain privilege, but they also bring certain precarities. And that's the road I navigate in my work and in my life. Over to you, Raj.
Thanks, Jyotsna and Gender at Work for having me here. I will do the privilege statement or acknowledgement, but before that, what I typically do is for people with differing access needs. I am a person with short, mostly black hair, and I'm currently with white collar. And in terms of my privilege, I am Savarna upper class person. And, you know, I have many privileges of education, of being able to access dialogue and discourse that is, you know, both global and local. So I'll leave it at that. But thank you so much for having me here.
No, thank you, Raj. So this conversation is really for us to today, in conversation with you, understand what non-discrimination means and what are the policies and systems and structures that can be put in place for us to learn about non-discrimination at workplaces, but also have a more stable discourse around it. Because as we know through our work that there is no one understanding of non-discrimination, and we all sort of come to it with our own experiences, with our own ideas about it, or what we have navigated in our life or at work. So really, we want to open up this space with you and want to ask you, how do you see non-discrimination and how do you see it operating or manifesting at work? And then we can keep the dialogue going. Yeah.
Sure. Sounds good. So I think, I always start off this conversation, and I think for the sake of this conversation, let's call workplaces institutions, because they are. Um, and, really workplaces mirror the prejudices or the makeup of larger society. So that means that my starting point is that institutions such as workplaces reflect a very default perspective. They are made for a certain default. Okay, that's my starting point. And what's that default? It's urban, upper caste, Savarna, white collar, cis heterosexual, male, and in India, Hindu, right? And this affects everything in the workplace. Who gets hired, who the workplace is designed for, bathrooms, policies, everything else. And so, what do we need to do in order to support those who are not that default? Especially because institutions will, in almost all senses, I think, put their weight behind the default. So that's the kind of starting point for what I see as an anti-discrimination or a non-discrimination policy. And I think I must juxtapose it with the, I guess, somewhat recent, fascination with DEI.
Yeah.
Simply because, people are talking about it a lot. People are saying, yes, diverse workplaces. They're making a business case for diverse workplaces. There are all sorts of arguments out there, but how do you have a diverse workplace without giving space for redressal or addressal when you are not the default? And there are many, just to even just to start us off. I like history, so I'll say that the right for what was stopping people from hiring women, or what does stop, and one of the kind of rationales given is that women will get pregnant. And how did work systems develop the idea of parental leaves? It was started in about 1920, where women in many places in the West were fighting for the right to vote, and also advocated for a convention on maternity protection. Now, that was put in place by the ILO, and then the rest is history. But could it stop there? Will our workplaces be okay if we don't have gender neutral parental leave, if we don't have parental leave for those who adopt? We have to place non-discrimination, I think, firmly in the arena of being an inclusive workspace. And now I've spoken too much, so was that clear? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, because I think what you're saying is that there is a larger society, right? And that is organizations or institutions really are the microcosm of that. And what we experience in society is what we also experience in institutions. So we inherently bring our own biases or prejudices or stereotypes within our institutions, or really the upbringing that we've had, or the worldview that we have learned. We bring that into our workspaces, not to say whether it's right or wrong, but it's what is being familiar to us is what we gravitate towards, and that's what we feel that is that then that becomes the reality or the lens through which we see workspaces.
Absolutely. The whole architecture of the workspace and the people within the workspace all reflect, that default, really. And this is no matter if there is a feminist leader or not having a feminist leader, because I think partly what a non-discrimination policy should do, if done properly, it should allow you to show which ways you are complicit in oppression. And anyone can be violent or oppressive. It's I do think that it's a space where complaints or non-discrimination policy gives you a space to reflect and think about the institution and what you're building. So I think it's about both the institution and as well as the, people who are part of the institution, because in that sense, you have to enter into this with your co-workers and alongside your co-workers. So it should really reflect the spirit of everyone who's in the workspace as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a very important point, and one of the reasons to also have this conversation with you, because when we were talking about doing circle back with you on non-discrimination, I think I want to share with everyone that you said that why me, and I think it's because also the discussion that we had was also very interesting, because I think there is also a set understanding that there can only be people either from caste minority backgrounds or from faith minority backgrounds to talk about non-discrimination. When we talk about discrimination, it is only related to caste. Well, it is related to caste. I think that is something that is intersecting no matter what we do and where we work. We also see the hierarchies operating within organizations which are also reflecting of the casteist structure and the normative structure. But when we have to talk about discrimination as a whole, and we begin to see that there is caste, which is a underlying structure, then there is also sexuality, and there is faith. There are many other identities that people embody and bring to workspace. And I think Mariwala has health initiative has drafted a non-discrimination or anti-discrimination policy. So we've also wanted to learn how that came about, what was the process, what motivated you and the organization to actually put together a policy in workplace, because we at Gender at Work India, we constantly sort of in our work with organizations, we do advise them to have a non-discrimination policy. We ourselves don't have it. We ourselves are kind of in process to draft one. But yeah, just wanted to hear from you. How did that come about, and how is the process like, and what do you think that it's aiming to do, and how much is it able to do or not do? Sorry, I think there are too many questions, but yeah, take your pick.
Okay, so I'll just start off with the policy that we have at MHI. And the reason that we have this policy is when we decided that, okay, we were more than 3 or 4 people, literally, actually more than 3 people, that we needed more policies. We needed policies, full stop. And at that point, we said, yes, of course, we'll have a posh policy, but just that cannot be enough. Just as we have an affirmative hiring policy, can't have affirmative or diversity or inclusion work without having a space for complaint. And as you very rightly said, caste is one very powerful factor, as is religion. But there are many others, such as disability, gender, sexuality, location of birth, where you're from, class, all of these also. I mean, it's not age is another one. So we said that we would make a policy, and just like we did with our POSH policy and our disability policy, we chose to make a non-discrimination policy, and we set out a bunch of different characteristics that were protected, and set out ways in which a complaint could be made. I think, I kind of want to say that it's very important that I know most places look at having a DEI policy or just a POSH policy. I think that's mandated by law. But unless I think people have a space to complain safely, I'm not quite sure how much these policies help for redressal. Now, what we did with this policy, as we did with all the others, is we drafted it usually with people who are representative of, say, for example, disability. We had a cross-cutting team who were disabled draft the policy. Similarly, so with POSH, we had people from different gender, sexuality, and caste locations, as well as disability. and similar with our non-discrimination policy. So I think that's the first thing, that it has to not just be done by some expert sitting somewhere. And by expert, I mean like some sort of a educated expert or someone who studied this, or like a lawyer, but instead it really must be informed by lived experience of people. So that's one thing. The second thing is, especially with the MHI anti-discrimination policy, we were clear that we have to have one senior member from our team leading the complaints committee, one other member who was reflecting a range of other marginalizations, and then one external independent member who has enough power actually to be able to call out a senior member on the team, on that committee, if need be. Now, these are just things in place that are important for the anti-discrimination policy, without going into like the actual details of the policy, simply because we know that complaints can be ignored, can be treated slowly, can be brushed under the carpet, or people can face recrimination for complaining. When in fact, the other thing should be true, which is, if you do get complaints, it means that something that you're doing within your workplace is working. It means that maybe your workplace culture is working, maybe your non-discrimination policy is working, maybe your accommodations policy is working. If you don't have complaints, it means that people are not feeling safe enough to complain. And that's a big issue. And now again, I've spoken a lot. So
no, I think it's a no. I was just gonna say that this is such an important point that you've said, that that people should feel safe enough to complain, and if there are complaints that are being surfaced within the organization, which is a marker that an organization is a safe space, and that people feel comfortable to bring up issues rather than hide. I think it's very, very important. And for me, I feel like even in the smaller organizations, there is still a possibility to do that. But how do you do that in organizations which are large or which has like many employees? The other thing was that, we also have something called whistleblower policy, right, which talks about surfacing issues. And but it's interesting because I think when you work with transformative restorative justice, and I want to bring it here, how do you balance this? Because we've seen in our own experiences that people want other people to be punished, people want other people to go through certain kind of harshness or certain kind of punishments for the wrongs that they've done. And it's not a very individualistic thing. I think this is quite systemic because that is what we are constantly fed, right? But how do you think that this is also one of the metric or one of the aspect of non-discrimination, where the transformative restorative justice meets conflict resolution, and how do they meet, and the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, I think this is such, I think, an important thing to discuss. And I know exactly what you're saying. People do want punishment. People do want someone who has maybe oppressed them in a certain way or been violent in whichever way, to face some consequence that is a more punishing consequence. And I mean, I'll give you some examples of how we have done this in our organization. One is, we've asked the complainant themselves, what is the action that you would like us to take? Is there anything that you can share with us? And once that has been received by us, usually the committee will respond and say that maybe this is out of the ambit, but we can look at apologies, we can look at other ways in which the person who is the other party, again, I'm very conscious of not using the words perpetrator, but even our language really doesn't lend itself quite easily to a more transformative justice model, right? And so we typically have asked, we've also then set the boundaries for what we can and cannot ask the other person to do. And then we've gone ahead and put it in place. But I think more importantly, one is the action that one takes with vis-a-vis the other party. And then what are the actions that you yourself are going to do as the organization? Because something in the organization allowed this incident to take place, or this series of incidents. So I think it's twofold. And I agree that it is quite hard. And we have struggled with it, absolutely. But I think there are also tools out there that are being made by different feminist communities world over. And I'll just name one. There's a group called Creative Interventions, and they have a lovely and extremely comprehensive toolkit that you can use in working with all parties involved, be they the victim or anyone else, in ways to reach. Because, canceling people, punishing people just doesn't work. Although, there have been times, and again, I'll share a story.
Sure.
There was a WhatsApp group, a work WhatsApp group. And I wasn't on the WhatsApp group, but there were other team members on the WhatsApp group. And I think what was being discussed was like a social media post for either it was Independence Day. Yeah, I think it was Independence Day. And an outside vendor, like an outside organization who was doing some social media work, said that, we will talk about the right of people to vote in India since independence. And when this was sent to me, I said quite a few people in India have not really been allowed to vote. And I named the communities. And amongst them were trans persons and Hijra communities, to which was relayed back on that group, to which I think the social media person said, oh, but these people are not even part of our society, and they don't deserve it. And this was sent to me separately as a screenshot. And I sat down, I asked for a meeting with the whole team, with the leader and the boss and everyone else. And in the end, unfortunately, we said, we are sorry, but we are not keeping any equation with you. We are not hiring you. This relationship is done. And sometimes you have to take measures like this. But it also says a lot with who is doing the work of addressing the complaint. And for me, I think it's very important that people who are leading the organization are accountable when a complaint is made. So I know that's a kind of roundabout way to answer your question. So sometimes that does seem like a little punishing, because literally I used the power of money to say, I'm sorry, we are not going to hire your agency.
Right.
But there was also no reflection on their end. And that's when I did that. But in many other cases, we've chosen to say, XYZ will do this work, and we as a leadership team will do XYZ work. So I think it's very important to ask the complainant what they would like to see as justice, and then work out the bounds while using tools that I think there are plenty of feminist tools out there. And I really encourage everyone to go and look up the Creative Interventions Toolkit. It is a thing of beauty, I promise you.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that. Shamavi has also put in the link for everyone to check it out. I think you've again raised a very important point, and I was not going there. I promised myself for once, maybe I will not talk about social media, but I think we live in a time where how can we not? And so much is impacted by social media, our work, our identities, our discourse, really everything. And so, and the culture which kind of works on social media, which is so narrow and myopic, even the discourse. Do you think that also finds itself or lend itself within institutions? And when we particularly think about non-discrimination, sorry to ask you this question, I know it's a very loaded one, but do you feel there is some sort of resonance with how we are living and learning discourse on social media vis-a-vis are working through within institutions? Because to me, it almost seems like we're talking about two different worlds, even though they're not.
I mean, I do. Okay, there is no way for me to say this non-bluntly, but I do see what you're saying. Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, when people look and see stuff on social media, a lot of the kind of work in praxis doesn't reflect maybe the theory. The other thing is that whatever people are seeing on social media is completely ahistorical. I mean, I think that's why I started with that example of, the ILO and the agitation to vote, as well as, maternity protection.
Right.
And so I think it can be a problem. Cancel culture is very much part of this whole thing. And I think it really connects back to the idea of transformative or restorative justice, because people then do want other people to be cancelled. And I think it's very important to take a step back and not live in that immediacy, and I think demand more from ourselves and as leaders of organizations, but also maybe asking the person who's complained to think through this. And usually, depending on the complaints policy, when there are conversations, and I have had conversations depending on complaints, people have shifted from the more kind of, I guess, social media inspired reactions. But I do think it's yeah, I think it's a hard intersection to address, honestly.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think there are so many things here, right? Because I also want to pick up again the point that you made about DAI. And I think it's become such a buzzword now. Even intersectionality, I think, has become such a buzzword because I see a lot of organizations are now kind of picking up and trying to work on intersectionality and diversity inclusion, which is great, I think. I think we do need more workspaces to be diverse. We do need people from different backgrounds to find their voices and representation at work as well. I think one of the things that we're also seeing how non-discrimination operates within our context, right? Because as somebody who's leading an organization which works on a diversity inclusion, which works on institutions and gender equality, but the leadership that the organization has doesn't belong to an upper caste Savarna uh, person. So in that context, I feel like it also sometimes spiral back to me where, you know, organizations either don't take you seriously or they feel like, of course, there are other people who are doing DI better, right? Because their understanding of DI, I do think it's the same, right? It is different because how people from caste advantage backgrounds or like Savarnas who would talk about DAI is so different than a person who comes from a Dalit background would talk about it. Similarly, in case of intersectionality as well. I mean, I think it's an overall point. It's not just particularly related to discrimination, but it's that how do institutions foster workspaces or how do institutions allow for discourses to match what they are doing? And I mean, to also know that, and to also kind of maybe understand that not all of us can do everything. Not all of us can do the same things, right? And that sort of space becomes such a tense space because there is also political economy of the civil society sector, right? How does one even sort of navigate this? This is a question that I ask of you. I mean, of course, I understand may not be easy answers here, but I mean, what I'm asking you is that do discrimination also takes different forms in institutions with regards to work, with regards to its operations, and where does power lie according to you?
So, I mean, like I said, there is a default, and the power lies in that default. Everything orients us to that default, which is, you know, Savarna slash upper caste, Hindu, able-bodied, cis heterosexual male. And even if I may not be all these characteristics, I still have some of these characteristics, and I will still default to that. And of course, you can see it in multiple places in the organization, right? And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of workplaces make is they think that this is an HR thing, but just it's not just in bathrooms. It's not just in hiring. It's not just in like putting I don't know, she, he, they on a form. It's also in promotions. It's also in social gatherings for like office gatherings, right? And again, I'll just give you an example because we struggled with this during a lockdown, during COVID. We would have these, I think once a month, every Friday, we would have like these online sessions, and it would be a kind of a rotating thing where one person would take the responsibility to do something fun uh, on that particular Friday for the whole team. And then we started asking a few more organizations what they did, found some online tools for whatever office, workspace, bonding, blah, blah, that kind of thing. And all the online tools had different games that either had like Pictionary had things like nachos, or like some singer, like, I don't know, gosh, even I don't know, there's maybe some very famous foreign singer like Taylor Swift, and like that's not appropriate for about 80% of our team. And so again, who are you keeping out when you do team bonding like that? Or who are you keeping, like who is being kept out, and who is the default for? Again, it's a very simple example, and not that it would end up even in a complaint, but even in the most insidious kind of smallest quote unquote things, you can exclude people and you can make them feel as less than, because how is anyone supposed to guess what a nacho is? And
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, for the people who are on the call who don't know what a nacho is, it's a Mexican slash American Mexican dish.
Oh, we're talking about food. I thought it's a game. It's a game.
Oh no, it's a food. It's So
right.
yeah. So or policies which say that okay, you have to go out, do this thing XYZ in a space where there are drinks or where there's loud music. Again, that actually keeps quite a few people out. So that's one point. I think the second point is, I think it's very important to state that the complaints or a non-discrimination policy is not just for, like, I don't know, very egregious complaints. Because if any workplace, I'm sure almost all workplaces, will have instances where there are attempts to gaslight people who are marginalized, historical marginalizations I'm talking about, or where the experiences of marginalized folks are undermined, like, oh, how do you know this? That's just your thought. Other people are different. And of course, I think the other more dangerous thing is broad sweeping generalizations about groups. Right? And I don't even need to go into examples here. There are plenty of examples just from caste.
Right.
So I think it can be very everyday. And then looking at a non-discrimination policy as well, I think one of the traps that one can easily fall into is if a complaint comes in about something like this, and the person says, oh, but this wasn't at all about caste, this wasn't at all about gender, it's just an issue between you people that you have to sort out. It's a communication issue. And that should never be the case, because none of this is happening in a vacuum. All of this has a context. It is historical, and it is present day, and it is current, and it is, an everyday thing. So we cannot leave that behind. It may on surface, it may look like it's a communication issue. It may look like it's a skill of boundary setting issue. But the moment I think that there are different power locations or different locations involved, one has to treat this complaint as it is from someone who faces a power differential vis-a-vis whoever they had an issue with or whoever they've had some experience with.
Right.
So I think it does affect the everyday, and it's very important to look at a non-discrimination policy in the sense of the everyday as well, not just in terms of some very egregious thing that could have happened.
I think the point that you're also trying to make is that I think non-discrimination is a lot of work. It's not easy, and it's not, I think what comes to us is discrimination very easy and by default. So to be able to be mindful, to be able to not indulge into it requires a lot of self-introspection, or having to do that every day, to be mindful, to be careful. But there are, of course, the flip sides of it, right? Because we also feel like, how do we strike that balance where we're able to work through our differences, but also not paralyze ourselves with the differences, right? Because the flip side of that is that sometimes you get so paralyzed by issues that you're unable to move or unable to make a headway, and you're just finding yourself into that lock and lock situation. And I think that's where silences come, and silences just then become more and more and more advanced, where conversations just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And, I really think that, at least for us at MHI, when we talk about it, we place this for us because of the work that we do, very much in workplace mental health. And so, what is an individual's responsibility in building the culture of the workspace? And how do you work with your colleagues in order to, I think, look at who experiences stress, what acts as stressors, and maybe what actions you have done or not done that have led to stress in colleagues. It could be
Right.
something from, two people sharing a screen for continuously for a colleague who is hearing impaired, or it could be something else entirely where I think you're being misgendered. But the idea, or I'll give you an example. I work best with examples, so I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. I think there was an instance. Again, this wasn't a formal complaint, but because I was part of, I think, one of the teams, I picked it up and had a conversation with a teammate, where unfortunately, again, this is a social media example, but we have some rules that anything that we post about our partner organizations usually is asked. We ask partner organizations for permission, XYZ. Now, this was a particular story which we had posted about before our partner organization, and they had written it, and we decided to repost it, the social media team. And the person who generally worked with the partner organization got in touch with one of the people in the social media team, who's a trans person and who lives with a mental illness, and told that person, you haven't asked for permission, and what's going on, XYZ. So of course this social media person got extremely stressed out, went into full blown panic, and then I called the other team member and I said, do you realize the consequences of your actions? Why did you do this exactly? Did you not stop and look at the protocols that we've put in place? And again, I think we are responsible as colleagues to each other as well. So for us, at least, I think putting it in the context of workplace mental health and building, I think, a culture of being responsible towards each other, but also recognizing that it's likely that you could be complicit sometimes or with things. I think that's how at least we've tried to engage with it. I don't know if that kind of answers your question. But yeah,
I
again,
think
hard conversations. And
hmm,
it's important for me to say here that I didn't just speak to the person who actually had the conversation with our social media team member. I actually spoke to their boss and their boss's boss. And I
hmm,
said,
hmm,
this is an issue for the whole team to look at, for your whole sub team to look at, because it should not have been done in this manner late at night on WhatsApp, freaking this person out.
hmm,
And
hmm.
clearly something in team communication needs to be changed if this is the way that colleagues are
Communication is
interacting with
happening.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think what I'm hearing is that in order for institutions to really practice or create a space or a workspace which is safe, which is free of discrimination, requires immense emotional labor, particularly from people in leadership, but also people at different verticals within the organization. But it also requires uh, the ability or the willingness to have important and difficult conversations. I think that's really the key, because where are we taught to have difficult conversations? Never in school, never in colleges, never at homes. So it's a skill that we never almost learn until we land up into workspaces, and somehow we're supposed to have difficult conversations, right? So how do we kind of learn as early on or teach as early on to have difficult conversations with one another, whether it's workplace or whether it's outside, is something that is constantly coming back.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I'll be entirely honest and say that going through certain complaints processes have given me sleepless nights. How do I do this? How do I think about it? And typically what I will do is I will reflect, of course, without giving details, and speak to other
Yeah.
maybe feminists around me for guidance. Am I doing this right? What do you think should be done? How do I articulate this? What could I have done differently? Because I know that, for example, when I had the conversation, the last example that I gave, I was hard on the person who chose to kind of share this or do this thing. But I was also very clear that it was a team issue, and the team leads need to take responsibility for it, not as much the person who was involved, right? So I do think these are very hard conversations, and they can give you sleepless nights. I don't know if I'm any better at
Yeah.
them. Um,
I think it's quite a universal experience. I can tell you, I've had many not sleepless nights, but really difficult evenings and nights to think about how am I going to navigate the situation. How do we how do we work through a difficult situation at work where nobody gets harmed, but you also address what needs to be addressed. I think it's not an easy. It is definitely not an easy path to walk on, particularly when you also have responsibility of everyone. But I also think that within institutions, at least in feminist organizations, the accountability and responsibility we imagine must lay on everyone, right? And everyone
yes.
is like what you were saying, that we're all responsible for each other. It's not that one person is responsible for the other only.
Absolutely. And I mean, I just to give you an example, we also actually explicitly say that in our disability policy. We say that this is how we do accommodations. We give examples, and we also write that remember that there are times that you will avail accommodations that someone else from your team may have to step in, work on whatever you are doing, XYZ. So please remember that there will be labor from some other team members, and they will be stepping in your place. So I think it is very important to remember that. But I think complaints and having anti-discrimination policies actually help to keep um, our engagement with a feminist, I think, transformative justice ethic very much alive and in the here and now and in the everyday. Otherwise, I think it can slip away from us pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very important point at which we should open up the discussion and see if there are any questions, thoughts, comments with the listeners and whoever has joined us. And let's hear from people if there is anything that people would like to share.
While other people are coming up with questions, I'll just take the liberty to pose one to you both. So first of all, thank you for that very insightful conversation. I think it's always interesting to, just realize that no sense of inclusion can come without having these difficult conversations. So I think that's just as a starting point, that's been very eye-opening for us, even like using Circle Back as a platform to have these conversations, I think has been really helpful. But coming back to my question, I think something that I opened with during the introduction was that, a lot of the times people now, when they express their opinion for an issue which for them may be moral, but for other people, there's a distinction between it being moral and political. And then there's often consequences whereby workplaces now choose to terminate employees for expressing their opinions or for siding with different parties on social media. So I guess that conflict is something that I've been thinking about, and just wanted to understand if you think that should be encompassed within a non-discrimination policy, or whether the onus to take action is on the employer or is on the organization when it is like a complex issue, or when it's an issue which I think has captured the cultural discourse in a way that's kind of difficult to escape.
I will let you have that question, Raj.
I mean, I think there are some easy answers to this. Like, I could easily say that, okay, as MHI, we are accountable to the communities that we want to engage with. And so obviously, if someone is online and going on a rant about a historically marginalized community, we will take it up with them. And I mean, I think firing is a harsh kind of, I guess, recourse. I mean, I would hope that I would not have hired someone who is very clearly discriminatory, but I would let me rephrase the question a little bit to, and this is again like a real life situation I think that happened, where I think someone on our team may have put up very honest but revealing photos and said something that was, I think, anti right-wing majority religion. Look at me doing word gymnastics here.
Those are the times.
Yeah. And I think all we did is, we asked them not to put maybe their work affiliation there, and asked them to kind of make their profile private because of the trolling and everything else. But what would I do if someone in my team said something about supporting Israel right now? I think I would probably have a conversation with them, and use this as a conversation point to talk about it, and talk about it also in the light of the work that we do. So again, I don't have any fixed answer for you. I think my biggest thing is this, that everything has context, everything has history, and I need to look at my own location. I need to look at what MHI as an organization does, because I can't forget the institution, right? Normally, when I frame things, I will frame it in that sense. Now, we work with organizations who are based in Kashmir and run by Kashmiris. How will I juxtapose that if there's a situation where someone comes to me and has put up something supporting Israel right now, right? So I will use these tools. I may not use my own personal kind of philosophies to have these conversations, but I would probably have a conversation. I don't have any hard and fast rules about people saying things on social media.
Right. No,
I think you're very wise in that regard. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense from the standpoint of being at a cultural moment where every issue is so complex, and you cannot have hardline stances on a lot of those things, or even easy answers to a lot of those things. So thanks for your answer. And like, if anybody else would like to go ahead, we still have some time left before we close the conversation. So please feel free to ask questions. We have a question from Navan in the chat box. I'll just read it out. Right. So Navan's question is, during the recruitment process, they happen to be open about their sexual orientation. And one of the questions in the final round with the VP of Finance of the big five companies, they were asked, considering that they are not straight, and if one of their team members is not comfortable about it, how would they work with this person for a project that they have to? And so that question is like, would this be covered in the non-discrimination policy? And it's addressed to both Jyotsna and Raj.
Jyotsna, did you want to, since I've now really spoken a lot?
No, I think, yeah, I mean, I can start and maybe you can chime in. I think these personal questions always sort of baffle me, right? Like the questions that are not pertaining to the job or to the role. And when those questions are being asked, I think my response to such questions is always like, why? Well, how is this relevant to the role that I am interviewing for? And can this be part of the non-discriminatory policy? It can be, I think, but it becomes difficult when you are not an employee and you're interviewing in that organization. So the policy may apply to you, of course, when you're when you're an employee, but most anti-discriminatory policies do not apply to you if you're not an employee. So that is also an aspect of how would then this something which is and must be part of non-discriminatory policy, but may not be applicable during the recruitment process. So that's.
So I completely agree with you, Jyotsna. It should not be a question that should be asked at all. And I would always look here is that, why has the onus of doing the work been placed on the person who's marginalized? And that should never be the case. The very fact that this is being asked in a hiring process, it means that probably the organization hasn't thought it through. And this is what I meant about really connecting D&I to having a non-discrimination policy, because visibility without protection is a trap. Okay, it really is. And I mean, I know that we're talking about sexuality here, but any kind of historical marginalization, be it caste, be it disability, self-censoring is really an act of safety and self-preservation. And it may not happen in my organization, but tomorrow I will never fault someone for not wanting to come out, because news may spread and they may be affected elsewhere. And so it's not that person's fault, and neither should it be kind of that person's work or labor to do this type of work. So ideally, it should very much come under a non-discrimination policy, but even much before that, it should actually come under just very simple basic training.
Or HR policy.
HR policy, D&I, I mean, it happens throughout the process, like I was saying. So, and in MHI, for example, we do have affirmative hiring, but we're very clear, if people don't want to divulge, they do not divulge. Like I never, hardly ever, even with all my privileges, I choose when to divulge that I'm autistic, that I have a learning disability, and there are other things still that I'm not fully divulging on this call, despite all the privileges, and that's completely okay.
Yeah, I think there is also an individual preference or discretion that they are allowed to practice, and somehow within the DAI discourse or within the employment processes also, sometimes we forget that individuals have agency, and it's okay if they want to practice it however they wish to.
It's
Yeah, sorry, you
no,
were saying.
I just wanted to say that, what you did at the beginning, the privilege acknowledgement. All our systems ask us to name the marginalization, and we never ever name the default. We never ever name the privilege, and it's much better if the system is ulta.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the idea of keeping privilege acknowledgement, because why do we want to only highlight marginalizations constantly? Because I think it is becoming this discourse where, everyone is saying that I am more marginalized than you. And so where do we go from there? Of course, those
I think that
marginalizations are important, but
that's another social media-ish kind of thing, the oppression Olympics. But yeah, sure.
yeah. Are there any other questions or thoughts? It doesn't even have to be questions. It could be thoughts or just reflection points that if you would like to share, then the floor is open.
So Darshana has a question. I'll just repeat it for everyone. How do you deal when the person discriminating is the leader of the organization? How do you get the leadership, including the board, to think of non-discrimination beyond a policy and like at a much more deeper personal level?
I think it's a very important question, Raj.
Very important question. And I absolutely think that the leader can very easily be complicit or be doing the discrimination themselves. It is entirely in the realm of possibility, which is why, I was saying that, for example, in our anti-discrimination policy, we have an independent person who we would like to think is powerful enough to challenge the senior person on our committee. So that's one way to do it. I think the other way to do it is to honestly have a board that does reflect the diversity or the makeup of the organization or the people that you're trying to work with, the communities that you're trying to work with. And then that board should be able to, hold leadership accountable. But other than that, one would hope, and I think unfortunately, this does not happen in non-profit or in civil society organizations. We don't talk enough about shifting the power and sharing the power and giving up our leadership. We really don't. I mean, there are so many people who hold on to their seats for many years, and I think that's something that we really have to build into our kind of everyday actions, as well as some roadmap, so that tomorrow I could be challenged by someone who's reporting to me without fear of recrimination, and even in an everyday conversation. I mean, that's ideally what one has to work towards, and I think having a roadmap toward that is quite important.
Yeah. I think adding to that, of course, one of the things is to also teach power within organizations, something that we've done and we do. And I don't know if that's something that most organizations are interested in, because it has ripple effects and it has effects on the organization itself, right? But it is important to institutionally also engage in conversations around power, especially if you're a feminist organization, because what I'm also learning and realizing is that a lot of people don't understand power and the differences in the degrees of power that we all have and different kinds of power that we all have. And we also always feel that the power is constituted with the leader, and it's not necessary. Like, of course, leadership has more power in an institution, and so does the board, but there also power which is which rests in different aspects within institutions, within people who are working in an organization. So how do we learn about power? How do we learn to use our power judiciously? How do we understand that we all have power to change or to disrupt? And I think clarity and learning around power is something that is also important, because once we understand our own personal power, we can also perhaps challenge or disrupt the power within institutions as well.
Completely agree with you, and it's a long-standing conversation that I've had with team members that we keep on having is how do we continuously build in an analysis of power in everything that we do, from assessing grant notes to how we interact with each other.
Right.
We have one more question from Geetika, which I will just repeat for everyone. I think they're just sharing a thought, actually. They're talking about having attended a webinar on feminist approaches to performance management. And they came across an organization where they practice rotational leadership for the CEO position, which which they thought was a great example of someone who was trying to adopt an actionable policy to address the issue. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point.
Agree.
If we don't have any more questions, then we can close. So we
I just wanted to say one thing really
Sure,
quickly.
sure.
I think rotational leadership is great as long as you have representation of marginalized folks at upper levels. It can't just be that, okay, we are like 5 cishet Savarna women rotating. So
I think also I'm thinking what happens when there is a rotational leadership, what happens to the institution? Because every leader brings their own vision and would like to work with their own vision. So it is it's not as easy to do as I think. I mean, but yeah, again, the representation within the rotational leadership, as well as, I don't know how to keep the ethos of organization alive in the mix of that also.
But I think finally, I just want to say that one book that really helps and someone's writing that really helps me is Sarah Ahmed's book. It's called Complaint.
Yeah.
And maybe if you haven't read it, read it.
Yeah. I think thank you for that suggestion. And I've read Sarah Ahmed's Killjoy, and I think that's the most popular one. But I'm going to also look at this one.
It's called Complaint by Sarah Ahmed, and I think you'll be able to find it online easily.
It's a very recent book, but I'm sure that people who know where to look will be able to find it online. So I think that's a great note to end this conversation today. I think just having spoken about non-discrimination with a focus on complaint, I think has been really critical because, like you said, Raj, just helping us engage with that feminist ethic of restorative justice, and also that feminist ethic of engagement. Complaint as a feminist practice, which is something that Sarah Ahmed talks about, I think that's been a very crucial takeaway for me, and I hope for the rest of the participants as well. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this and for engaging with this very important idea. I would also like to thank Nitika and Preeti for effortlessly interpreting the session. And thank you to everyone who joined and stayed till the very end. I really request everyone to check out our previous conversations and share them so that we can continue to have conversations like this. Because I think, like I mentioned, the purpose of this series is to keep coming back to these conversations and to keep figuring out how we can learn as we go. Because we do strongly believe in learning together and in collective action. So in that regard, we're hoping that you can learn from us, with us, and we can learn from you as well. So thanks a lot once again. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to write to us, and we'll see you next month. All the relevant links are available on our social media platforms. They're available on our link tree. So if you want to check out previous conversations, previous guests, please feel free to do that. And see you all soon. Thank you to everyone once again. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you
so much.
These conversations, difficult ones, and ones that we don't have solutions to. Thank you all.